So question one here on module one of 302 is our first of several word and context questions. This one, if you missed, it is likely that there are more than one word on this of these answer choices, more than one of these answer choices, which you do not know. And if that is the case, it is highly recommended by me and anyone else to really study vocabulary. We have a big list. Many of these words are on our lists. We want to look for a synonym somewhere in the text. Skepticism is what aligns with what we should be putting there. Something that suggests that dubious is doubtfulness. If you don't know the word dubious, you can think about doubt with the B and dubious being similar. Festive doesn't work because festive is a word we should all know. Festivity, fun, festival. Pious means religious. It's a word we should know. And then terrestrial, meaning landed or of the land. We should know that neither A, C, or D really has any relevance to what we're seeing here in terms of skepticism, and the fact that, that skepticism is sort of natural to surprising or counterintuitive results. So that's question one. So the question two, we have another word and context question. The first thing I want to say for a question like two, if you're missing this, you might be just plugging and playing each word into the passage and seeing if they work. And if you do that, you'll find that a lot of these words make sense, especially with the second clause, right? Group hunts led by the alpha female and the, for example, solitary care of offspring within the clan. There's nothing that sounds immediately to the ear wrong about that, which might be why we're choosing an animal like or an answer choice like solitary or canine, knowing that wolves, for example, up here are canines. But those are all distractors, right? Those are things which are trying to pull us off of the correct answer. What are we looking for? We're looking for a synonym. Okay, we're looking for something in our text which is synonymous to what we would put here. So we see cooperative hunting behaviors and social structures. All right. So we're looking for something that matches up with that cooperative. There's only one word that has that, communal. We know that communal, with that root that's shared with community, means working together. Indigenous means local to an area or native to an area. Canine or dogs, and solitary means all alone, solo, right? So we really only have one answer choice that aligns with what the context of the passage is saying, but we have several which sound good. That's why we want to make sure we're looking for a synonym and we're going from a robust strategy rather than just taking every answer choice and plugging them in and seeing if it sounds good. We have our third word in context question here in module one with question three. This one is our first where we have a little bit more difficulty in terms of our words and our answer choices. But I think that this one is relatively easier than even question two because a lot of these answer choices, our distractors, are pretty clearly not working. So we want to try to find a synonym for what we're putting in there. I'll show you where the synonym was. Coordinate, right? So variety of actions, and really everything kind of builds to that definition of harmonious, okay? Harmonious means a bunch of things working together properly. In concert basically means harmonious. These are working together. Jarring is an opposite distractor, right? All of these other things seem to suggest they're working together well, but jarring doesn't really work. Flawed would also suggest that things aren't working. We should know jarring is a vocab word. If you don't know this word, you probably need to be studying your vocab list a little bit more. And flawed, very clearly, we all know. Youthful is another word that we all should know. And we don't want to get stuck into the kind of trap of thinking that youthful means it's functioning well. So if you're missing this answer choice, or if you're missing this question, I'm thinking you probably just don't have enough of these vocab words, because with these vocab words, we should see that very few of that, only one of them doesn't not work. Okay. Three of these clearly don't work. In that instance, we can get to a confident answer choice, even if we don't know what harmonious means. And again, we should probably know what harmonious means. Harmony is a word that we all likely should be knowing. So with that, we should be getting to A. Question 4, another word in context here on module 1. Here we have relatively simple words in our answer choices. This is a classic thing on the SAT. Not every SAT word in context question is difficult vocabulary. Sometimes the words are relatively easy, but finding the context of the text is important and might be a little bit difficult, okay? So, typical plant growth, okay, involves all these things, but not all plants have this pattern. Some, for example, have a different pattern, right? So most plants have a 1-year pattern, but not all do this. Some have a 2-year pattern. So this not all is important. This negative is going to clarify that this needs to be positive, right? Why? Because that's how we negate it. So an answer, if you're choosing an answer like A, if this said, but some plants avoid this pattern, you'd be correct, right? You maybe just didn't catch this negation with not all. I wonder if you got the wrong answer choice here. You might have been concerned about how easy a word follow is. Sometimes I find that we fall for what we call the Finding Nemo or sophistication distractor on these kind of questions, where evaluate seems to be a little bit fancier of a word than follow. You don't need to go to a thesaurus in these, right, to try to like find a fancier word. It's not an essay you're turning into a pretentious English teacher. We want to find what works. Evaluate has a different meaning, right? Evaluate means to kind of decide if something is of quality or not. It's not that's not the context here. We're really just saying follow. And then hinder, it means to like stand in the way or make something not work. So if you're not choosing follow, you might have a vague understanding of what evaluate or hinder means. And you're thinking, that sounds a little bit more sophisticated than follow. And I think it's kind of similar, even though follow works. Don't fall for that. Follow works here. If you find that follow works, even if it's a non-sophisticated word, we want to be selecting. All right, question 5 on our word in context module 1 is probably the most difficult word in context we've seen so far on this test. We have some words that are difficult, but we might kind of know, which I find are actually the most compelling distractors on word in context. It's not the words that we don't know anything about, but rather a word like emulating. I think emulating is a word that we all maybe know a little bit of what it might mean, but we don't exactly know what it would mean. Or synchronizing, right? Synchronicity, these words that are like a little bit more advanced, but they're not super arcane vocabulary. So we want to find what determines the meaning in the text before we just start plugging these in and seeing how they work. So this was the old perspective. And then we say, however, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So this, however, is really, really important. This is our pivot, okay? We could call it our but sometimes. All right. This is going to very much clarify what we need here. We need a opposite of what we have up here. Disproving is the one that's perfect, okay? You don't have to figure out the science of this in order to answer this question. You don't have to figure out the science to realize strengthening doesn't work. How do we figure out that strengthening doesn't work? This pivot, right? How do we figure out that emulating, which means to kind of copy or do something similar, doesn't work? This pivot. How do we know that synchronizing doesn't work, which means to kind of get into alignment? Pivot, right? However is what clarifies that all of these don't work and clarifies that disproving does work. So always be on the lookout for that in a word and context question. Again, if these words are ones that you kind of know, but don't know super deeply, you probably need to be studying vocab. The sixth word and context question on our first module has many of the same difficulties as questions like 5 or 2, where our answer choices that are incorrect are ones that we might kind of know, and they might appeal to us on the basis of being sophisticated sounding. We're like intuitively, it doesn't work here, but it sounds kind of interesting, especially compared to a word that we all know, like solely. So we just want to make sure first we're trying to get rid of things, right? We want to see what do we want to put here. I would imagine something like exclusively would work, which solely is a direct synonym to. And then after we think of what kind of word we want to put there, we want to see what words just don't work here. Nefariously. Nefariously means to do something with ill intent, right? Does nefariously work here? Does recycling materials into roofing tiles seem nefarious? There's nothing that suggests nefarious or ill intent or like maliciousness, being a bad guy in this text. But nefarious is kind of an interesting sounding word. Haphazardly, that means to do something sort of without care, sort of last minute, thrown together. There's nothing here that suggests that either. We don't want to just presume that this is a haphazard process. We want to see if it says it here. Then intuitively means to do it. We've talked about intuitively in class, if you're in class with me. Intuitively means to do something sort of within your nature, right? There's nothing that says intuitively here. So solely is the only one that like has any sort of plausibility. But you might not choose solely because you don't like the fact that it doesn't sound as sophisticated as our other words. That's a distractor that the SAT employs very often. Remember, we're looking for what works. We're not looking for what we think sounds good, right? What works in terms of meaning and fit? Only solely. Or solely. So question 7 here is a phenomenal example of a difficult but very valid word in context question, right? Sometimes the logic of a text is what reveals to us the meaning of the word that we need to find, right? So we have this subordinating, to use a grammar idea, beginning. While there is copious research into planets, there has been blank. Okay, so we're looking for the opposite of copious. We're looking for the opposite of copious. So you need to know what copious is to start off with. This is a classic example of the fact that vocabulary on the test is important not solely because of the word of our answer choices. We sometimes have vocabulary in the text that is essential for us to know in order to get our answer choice, all right? So remember that when we're teaching vocabulary, we're not only going to see it in answer choices, we're going to see it everywhere. So what does copious mean? It means an abundance, a deep abundance that's usually helpful or beneficial. Wonderful copious notes might be what you want to write in a history or biology class. So you get all that information in so you can memorize it. So while there has been an overwhelming abundance of research into planets, there has been an opposite of that, investigation in environments that allow for other hypothetical life forms, such as those based in liquid ammonia. All right. So we want to say an absence of. Okay. So surplus of is a really good distractor because it means the same thing as copious. Okay. If you're choosing this, you know what copious means, but you're not paying attention to the subordinating while, which clarifies that we're going to have an opposite answer choice there, right? A banter about, so bantering is when we kind of go back and forth in a witty way. And then influx too, that means a sudden increase, right? The only thing that really works here would be a dearth. Okay, but we might not know what that word means. A dearth of something means a lack of it, all right, or an absence of it, especially in a sort of proportional way. So it's like there should be more, but there isn't that there. So that's how we can get to dearth. These are words that we might not know. The most important word in this passage, in this for this question, is ironically in the passage, not in the answer choices, and it's the word copious. This is a clear indication of why it is important to study our vocab. Okay. And that ends our word and context for module 1. We're moving on to question 8 here from module 1. Finally done with our word and context questions. This is a purpose and structure question. Okay. So we're basically being asked, what's the main idea? But we're asked in a little bit of a different way than what is the main idea. We're asked about the main purpose. Okay. If we're missing this question, I'm thinking that we're probably being bogged down in distractors and missing certain things. So, A, if this said a confrontation or a meeting between Jim and Antonia, nothing possibly wrong there, right? But we're likely going too far in our inference if we're reading this word angry and not getting rid of it. We think angry is right. We're inferring too deeply here. Is there anything that suggests angry? I mean, her eyes are anxious, but that isn't angry. There's a shock, but that isn't angry, okay? So that qualifier, angry, is enough to make an answer choice like A wrong, all right? For answer choice C, we see some good things, right? Anxiety, okay, that looks good. But then the diminishment of spirit in her eyes. Even though we see the word diminishment here, it's not correct, right? It says not diminished. Okay, we can't be choosing the word diminishment of spirit. We can be choosing an answer choice with the positive diminishment of spirit, agreeing that there's a diminishment of spirit. When it says her eyes were not diminished, her personality, her identity was not diminished. And then finally, changes in her appearance might show up in this passage, right? But her desire to change her appearance, where do they show that she desired to change her appearance? Okay. All these other answer choices have something that is wrong with them. But with B, there's really nothing that's wrong. Okay. So we see, despite her hardships, okay, she had some hardships. We see that right there. And she has a strength of identity. We see that right there. There's nothing wrong with B. Therefore, we can't get rid of it. We can get rid of A, C, and D, though. And that should be the approach that we're taking to a question like this. So question 9, we have a detail question. We have some difficulty here. What is the difficulty? Well, we really have to understand what this part is in relation to the rest, all right? So sometimes a man does catch some luck, like a drop into town from an old man in a pickup. So that doesn't really mean anything until we read the rest of the passage. People don't stop for nobody at this hour, just so sun, not up good yet. When he was young, it was easy to hitch a ride anywhere, right? So he's saying, when I was young, everything worked out. Always people heading down to the coast, join a group of boys. It's pretty easy. It doesn't matter. Don't even have to be friends, but these days are different. He's not old. He's not little anymore. He's not a kid. But going back to the beginning, he did catch some luck. All right. So he did catch some luck today. He did get a ride, but it's a lot harder now because he's not a little boy no more. So I want to show how these distractors are getting you if you're missing this question. Easy to hitch rides in his youth, right? Good. But only during hours that the sun was up? It doesn't mention that in his youth. Right? See, there's really just nothing to suggest about that. And then Darwin is definitely reminiscing about, sorry, that should be blue. Darwin is certainly reminiscing about younger days on the coast, right? And in the city. But the old man, is that there? No. So then with B, he's no longer a young boy, that's there, and then feels grateful that he can still catch a ride. Yeah, that's there. Okay. But you just need to understand that first sentence in order to get this one. So 10, we have a main idea or central ideas question. We want to make sure we're understanding the main idea of this artist. So, wishing to fuse maximalist and minimalist effort elements. This dude crafted a dichotomous, right? Meaning mix of both. Art installation known as Sunday. One half is disorder and vibrance. The other is futuristic and minimalist. And it's inspired by Panic Room. Okay. So Maximus and Minimalist put together to convey his art. So the main idea is we have to figure that that's the main idea, ultimately. That's the main thing. It's not the topic, it's the main thing. So we have the blending of minimalist and maximalist elements. We want that. It's inspired by someone else's. This pretty much gives us everything we need. C is true, but is that the whole passage? No. B is true, but is that, is this the main idea? No. Where's Pavel Vetrov and where are influences? And then A, well, one, it's not a minimalist art collection, so that part's wrong. But more than that, this wouldn't even be the main idea because this is not brought up at all. Okay? So we have a lot of distractors that might be compelling because they recycle language from the text. They do things like that. But there's only one answer choice, which really conveys the totality of the passage without violating the passage in any way. Question 11 is one of these quite tricky command of evidence textual questions. All right. We need to find the student's claim, which is that historians have characterized Francis of Assisi solely as religious rather than diplomatic. Okay. So the student claims that historians are doing this unfairly. Claims that historians are doing this. Okay. So all we need is to find an answer choice which demonstrates that this is taking place, that historians are characterizing Francis of Assisi solely as religious rather than his diplomatic achievements. We don't need to prove his diplomatic achievements. We need to prove that other historians haven't given a damn about them. Okay, so that's a little bit different than we might expect we're being asked here. So A, mesmerizing figure who lives on. Okay, that has nothing to do with religious icon versus diplomatic achievements. B talks about his religious things, and it doesn't mention his diplomatic achievements. That might be interesting, but we will maybe want to see something that compares them. C then says, Assisi's diplomatic gains bear little need for attention. It is his piety and relationship to the Catholic Church that mandates historical analysis. That's the one which is historians saying the thing that the student says the historians do, which the student says is wrong, right? And then D, historians remain divided about the details of his life. Okay, C is the only one that brings up, for contrast, this idea of his diplomatic perspectives and his religious achievements. Question 12 is our command of evidence quantitative. All right. We have something tricky here, which is the fact that, as is often the case on the SAT, we have a lot of information that's not really all that relevant, but we need to read all of it nonetheless in case it is relevant. So in this case, we hear that there's a survey to understand their preferred destinations. That's all we really need from this as of right now, okay? But we needed to read that in a detailed way early on, but then we determined what the question's really asking. In some regions, highly experienced hikers were found to be more likely to select certain trails, and even constituted the majority of hikers who chose those trails. For instance, okay? So this for instance is important. This transition is clarifying what the rest of this paragraph must say. What must it say? It must say this, that the majority of hikers on certain trails are highly experienced. Okay, so where can we find an example of that? It seems like anything that mentions river trails isn't going to work because in no instance are river trails made primarily, or are hikers on river trails composed primarily of experienced hikers. But then we see, oh, look, in a few instances, here, here, and here, looks like mountain trails are preferred by experienced hikers, right? The majority of people on mountain trails are experienced. Why? Maybe because they're dangerous or what have you. And then this one, it's kind of unclear. Looks like it's maybe about 50, maybe a little less than 50, okay? But definitely on the mountain trails, we have a majority are experienced hikers. So we want to hear something which says, on mountain trails across, whatever place in far north Queensland, mountain trails are composed majority experienced hikers. So in West, far north Queensland, is this 50%? No. So while the mountain hikers is good, the desert hikers is not for A. In Central, this isn't true. Basically, it is not true that there were more experienced river hikers or high proportion of experienced hikers on river trails than others. And then C, this is true, right? In the East, more than half. In the West, more than half. In Central, too, it's not mentioned, but it could have been, but it doesn't need to be. And then finally, D is not very true, nor does it demonstrate the majority of hikers. All right. So that's how we arrive to C for 12. All right. If we're missing a question like question 13, which is a textual command of evidence question, we really want to clarify in the question itself, this part of the question part, what we're being asked. So we're looking to support Chomsky's argument. Okay, Chomsky's argument. You might know for other reasons, but it's also probably one of the most influential linguists of all time. All right. So this claim here that speech was a product of the interactions between humans and their environments, okay, the claim of Skinner is ultimately irrelevant to what we're being asked. What we're being asked is to see that there is an innate capacity to learn languages regardless of sociocultural distinctions. All right. So A would be a very good support for Skinner, but that's not who we're looking to support. This would probably support Skinner or actually refute Chomsky, but we're not looking to refute, we're looking to support. And D would clearly support Skinner, right? But that's not who we're looking to support. We're looking to support Chomsky. B, we see that regardless of background, we get early language milestones, right? This is innate. What does the word innate mean again? From birth, right? Natal, innate. So B is correct. Because of those reasons, and A, C, and D are incorrect because they mainly refer to the other claim. Make sure you're keeping clear which claim you're looking at. So question 14, we have a logical completion or what we call inference question. Okay, we need to make sure that we're linking to what else we have. So what was the claim in this passage? The claim was that Naganson herders used a system that was developed by the Evenki centuries earlier, even though Naganson herders had never actually seen the Evenki make this, okay? So these are Siberian indigenous groups, reindeer-type herders, okay? Barring the possibility of several herders of the same era independently developing techniques that the Evenki had already invented, this most strongly suggests something, okay? So this is kind of important, right? This means that it isn't just kind of coincidental. It means that there must be some sort of learning taking place, even though the Evenki were earlier All right. So A suggests that they learned these techniques from other individuals who are directly influenced. That makes sense. That's a logical completion. That's a logical inference. We want to make sure we're not going to jumping to any conclusions in our inferences. So this just refutes what we have, right? This just couldn't be true. They're both in northern Siberia. The Nagansen are in northern Siberia. Okay. What does this have to do with anything? Nothing. And they weren't learning from the Evenki. So if this were true, it would make sense. This doesn't really have any relation to the first part of our text. So the only one that relates to our text is A. Make sure you're keeping clear on that. All right, 15 is our final reading side question for Module 1. It is a logical inference question. It's a really good, interesting question, okay? So we basically get the context that a particular Norwegian coin is discovered much further south than where Norse explorers or Norwegian explorers had gotten, okay? So they had gotten to Newfoundland, according to this passage, right? And yet they never got any further south. However, regardless of this coin appearing in Maine, not a single other one has ever been discovered, meaning that they are uncertain. So, if this was indeed found in Maine, and given the lack of Norse artifacts in the region, it would be reasonable for researchers to conclude. So this is basically saying, is there a way that this could be found in Maine and be a Norse official, legitimate artifact without the Norse having been there themselves? Well, people could have traded it along, right? People could have moved it along some other way. The native people likely could have moved this penny from this silver coin from Newfoundland down to Maine. Okay, so this is a direct refutation. Okay, A surely doesn't work because they're saying that there would be no other ones found there. C, what does this have to do with the text? The text is about the fact that the Norse are not there. This doesn't have anything to do with settlers of Penobscot Bay. All right. This is about how does a coin get beyond the people who made it? Trade. Okay. And D, excavations resulting in the discovery of the Maine penny caused all other Norse artifacts buried to be lost. Okay. That is a too extreme inference. Okay. If this was true, yeah, sure. Okay. But is there anything that suggests that this could possibly be true? No, it's too extreme, right? We want to make a safe inference. So what is a safe inference? Well, that this was likely traded down. And with that, we get to the end of our first module's reading section. We'll now be moving on to the grammar writing portion of Module 1. So here we are continuing with the grammar writing side of Module 1 of Test 302. First question is a punctuation question. So basically what we have here is a non-essential phrase. So from here to here, we have a non-essential phrase. So non-essential phrases are not necessary for the function of the sentence. And we can separate them off with a pair of commas, a pair of dashes, or a pair of parentheses. So basically, we just want to recognize that the real sentence here is that Cab Calloway was known for his distinctive scat style singing. His 1931 recording of Minnie the Moocher became a major success. That's the real sentence. And then the clarification of who Cab Calloway is, which is really helpful but not necessary, is a renowned American jazz musician and actor. And that's separated off with a pair of commas to create the non-essential phrase. Question 17 here on Module 1 is another punctuation question. Ultimately, it's asking us whether we are connecting two independent clauses or if we have one singular clause throughout. So a desmodromic valve is a type of poppet valve found in reciprocating engines, and it differs from conventional valves by being actively closed using a cam and leverage system rather than relying on a typical spring mechanism. Okay, so our subject is here, and here is our now our predicate, our verb. That means we have a clause, and is this an independent clause? Yes. Why is it an independent clause? It doesn't have a subordinating term, so it doesn't have a while or there, since or anything like that. So therefore, we need to use the semicolon to separate that first independent clause from the second independent clause. However, it differs from conventional valves by being actively closed using a cam and leverage system. Therefore, we use the semicolon. How could this perhaps work as C? We saw something like, while a desmodromic valve is a type of poppet valve found in reciprocating engines, it differs from conventional valves. So if we started with the subordinating, we wouldn't need the however, and we wouldn't need the semicolon. But because we don't, we need the semicolon, and we need the transition of however. So for 18, we have another punctuation question, and we have another question in which we are seeing what are our two clauses, basically. So we have our first clause. The term third place refers to safe spaces outside of home and work wherein ideas are exchanged and relationships are established. And we have our second idea with a different subject and a different predicate. Urban planners aiming to enhance community Urban planners aiming to enhance community stability emphasize the vital function that third places can fulfill in bolstering our community bonds. Okay, so both of these can stand on their own. Both of these have a subject and a predicate. Therefore, both of these are independent clauses. When we have independent clauses, we only have three options: semicolon, a comma and a fanboys, or a period. The only one of those three options that's present is C. Some reasons you might get thrown off is maybe A, you think, this comma and this comma create a non-essential phrase, but no, that's not the case, okay? Or maybe for B, you think, all we need is a fanboys. No, not the case. So C is the only one that fulfills one of our three requirements for combining independent clauses, either a period, like we have here, or a semicolon, or a comma and a fanboys. Okay, so for question 19 here, we have another question concerning clauses and punctuation. In this case, we're looking to identify whether we have a dependent or independent clause starting our second sentence. So I want us to read the whole text, but that first sentence is ultimately not essential in this particular question to focus on, but I still want us reading every time, okay? Let's look at the second sentence. Known for recording miraculous events and supernatural conversations. Okay, this is clearly a dependent clause. Why? We have this subordinating. Known for, right? If it said, Janam Sakis record miraculous events and supernatural conversations, it would be an independent clause. But it's not, because we have that known, okay? That leads us to want to resolve or finish this idea. How can we do that? Well, with this independent clause after. So we start with a dependent clause and then add an independent clause to the end, creating what we call a complex sentence. We always use just a comma. All right. Now, I'm assuming if you missed this question, you either chose C, and C is wrong because that first is a dependent clause, so it can't stand on its own. Can't stand on its own as a sentence, so therefore we cannot put a period. Or maybe you chose B, which does everything right, but the comma is just a little too early. If you chose B, you're probably moving just a little too fast. Known for recording miraculous events and supernatural conversations, Janam Sakis. Doesn't make any sense, okay? So just make sure you're taking your time if you're choosing something like B. In C, make sure you know your rules of how to combine dependent to dependent clauses. Okay, so for question 20, we have another grammar question. It's on the verb tense side of things. So we want to make sure that we are making that we conjugate our verbs into the right tense. So we have two verbs to conjugate here. We have the helper verb, right? Either here. And then we also have the other verb, the to be verb here. Okay. Finally, in the middle, kind of mucking things up, is this traditionally adjective. So the evolution of infrared sensing observed in different types of snakes, something traditionally, something classified as an aid in prey detection, but then there's whatever, some other things, okay? So this next sentence is actually very important. However, recent evidence suggests a broader functionality, including thermoregulation and predator detection. This means, however, recent evidence, this means that this idea, classified as an aid in prey detection, is a previous existing thing that ends in the present tense, okay? So that means that we want to have it be something which is ultimately done, all right? So it's, but also is nowadays, okay? So it's being overturned, but it still is relatively present in the current sense. So we're probably looking for what we would call our present perfect, okay? Where we start with the has, and then we get our tense. Present perfect or present perfect progressive. So has traditionally been, okay? Are traditionally being, well, the being is wrong. And then are is weird as well, okay, in the present tense, okay? Are traditionally doesn't really make sense either. But now why are we getting has instead of have? All right. Because have would be for two subjects, but has is for one subject. So if you're selecting D, have, it is most likely that you are thinking, we're talking about pit vipers and boas and pythons. But no, we're not talking about those two. We are conjugating instead for the evolution. The evolution has traditionally been classified by science, okay? So to decide between A and D, we have to think about number. And then to decide between A and B, we have to think about tense, right? Or time. So A works because we have only one evolution. The boas and pythons and pit vipers are within a non-essential phrase. They don't actually contribute to how we conjugate this verb. So 21, we have another punctuation question. This one is quite tricky. All right. We wanted to see this here is a non-essential phrase, whereas this is all an independent clause, and this is a dependent clause. Starting our dependent clause with while. We're using a comma to connect our dependent and independent clause, which is the typical way. You can sometimes omit a comma when connecting a dependent clause to an independent clause. We don't always need a comma to tack a dependent clause onto an independent clause, but sometimes we need it. Why? We don't want to suggest that the uniquely sparkling background while, right? We don't want to suggest that the uniquely sparkling background and then while the paint colors are derived. We don't want to suggest that this happens while the paint colors are being derived. If there's no comma there, it changes the meaning. It suggests that they use this special paper while something else is going on. But that's not how while is functioning here. This is suggesting rather that there's another part that happens, and then there's another thing, okay? To put this maybe a little bit more clearly, if you were to read, craftsmen use special paper to achieve a durable and uniquely sparkling background while the paint colors are derived. Now it's unclear where the clause is, right? While the paint color is derived sounds like it could be part of that first independent clause. But because it's part of the second dependent clause, and we need to clarify that, we can put a comma. So this is a classic example of it's not a rule that you need a comma to add a dependent clause to an independent clause. But in this case, we need one for clarity of meaning. We always want to think meaning is the determinant of grammar. So 22, we have a question basically about number. All right. We also have some other distractors in the way. So C we can get rid of because it doesn't have the article. We have a semicolon here suggesting that we have two independent clauses, but we know that we can't start with an independent clause because characterized it shows that we have a subordinated thing in the first clause, meaning it's dependent. D, who refers to people. We don't have people here. So we're really between, do we have one thing for it or two things for they? Well, what is the subject? The Mesopelagic zone, right? The zone is singular. Therefore, all the way down here, we need to keep it singular. If you're selecting A, you're probably lining up they with these things, right? But we know that it should be it because here it is again. We know it's singular because we're talking about the zone, not the other positions. So question 23, we have another punctuation type question. We're basically seeing, is this typically coming within a clause or separating two different clauses, independent clauses specifically? All right. So if we had this, it would be all one clause. If we're going with C, it would be all one clause. Cretins are sizable portions, blah, blah, blah. This is clearly not one clause because we have different verbs throughout, okay? So as such, we can get rid of C. You can also get rid of D for that reason. If you're selecting B, you're probably not correctly understanding how we use commas to combine two independent clauses. We can use a comma to combine two independent clauses, but it must have a very special type of conjunction. Conjunction we call fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys. Typically is a transitional adverb. Transitions cannot be used to connect two independent clauses with just a comma. Okay, if we're going to connect it with a transition type thing, we're going to need to use either a semicolon or a period itself. In this case, atypically. Okay. The other thing is that typically actually is subordinating here as well. We're just for our next sentence, which so the next clause isn't exactly an independent clause, but it's part of a complex sentence. It has an independent clause here. So therefore we combine it with a period, etc. So for 24, we have our first rhetorical synthesis question. These rhetorical synthesis questions are the only question on the test where I want us looking at the question first. The question is where we get all of our information. So we want to summarize while highlighting explanations. Okay, so we want to make sure that we are showing explanations. All right. So where are our explanations? One is here. One is here. So both of these notes need to be in our answer choice. Additionally, we need a little bit of a summary. So these three things all summarized. Let's look at our answer choices and which ones are wrong. So A, which is correct. We have explanation 1 and explanation 2. All right, cool. We have both of our explanations. Now, do we have a little bit of a summary? Yes. They show that they are moving more quickly than they should, which is what they talk about up here. B, we don't have an explanation. C, we don't have an explanation. And D, we don't really have an explanation, okay? The only answer choice which offers the second parameter that we need from the question is that. Always look at the question first. Number 25, we have a rhetorical synthesis question. We want to be focused on the question itself, all right? This is the one question type on the reading and writing where I want us looking at the question first. We want to emphasize the sources of inspiration when the game is made. So there's a whole bunch of notes about the game, but really the main thing that we need here is that the inspiration from the rubber hose style of animation and then the surreal qualities of other works. All right. This is how they do it. This is what the consequences are. This is how the game is. This is an introduction, right? Really, all we need to focus on, though, is where they are inspired, which is B. We see that they take cues from classic American cartoons. There we are. And surrealistic visuals. There we are. And then they also say vintage recording. There we are. Those are their inspirations. This is the only answer choice which mentions their inspirations. This says that they use them, but it doesn't say that they are inspirations. This focuses on its consequences, which is interesting and it's in the notes, but doesn't answer the question. And then C focuses on how the game or what the game is, but again, that does not do what the question itself is asking. So for 26, we have a rhetorical synthesis question. Unlike every other question on the reading and writing, we want to look at the question first and see what parameter are we actually being asked about in all these notes. So we want to emphasize the Tajik reception to a writer's work, okay? So we want to see how do Tajik respond? Okay, so in Tajikistan, it became an official textbook, right? And we also want to see that she is indeed Tajik, okay, from Tajikistan. So the only answer that mentions how Tajiks receive it is here. So she's highly esteemed in her native country, Tajikistan, Tajik, okay? A little bit of an inference there, but fine. And that it is in the school curriculum, okay? So it definitely is in D, but let's see, make sure it's not in A, B, or C, right? This talks about her life, but does it have Tajik response? No. B, it says that she's Tajik, but does it say how Tajiks respond? No. And C just says that she published a book. There's really nothing in C. Therefore, we have to resolve to D for this question. So for 27, we have a rhetorical synthesis question. This, unlike every other question on the SAT, this is the only question I want us looking at the question stem first, right? Because there's a lot of superfluous or additional unnecessary information in these notes. We want to focus on just the notes that are most important for the question. So we want to look at a similarity and a difference between the two artists, okay? So we have two artists, Tobin and Gilberto, all right? So we want to see a similarity, okay? So they collaborated. That might be a similarity. Now we also want to see another similarity, that there's diversity, right? Diversity. Now we also want to see a difference as well, though. So we have unique production to sound design, audio manipulation, whereas over here we have a relaxed bossa nova style. So they have different styles. They both are Brazilian. So C, we see that they are both Brazilian. Nice, right? And we see that they collaborated. Nice. But what's different? Well, they follow different styles. So B is only differences. A only talks about bevel, doesn't talk about both. And D only talks about a similarity. So B is only differences, D is only a similarity, and A is only one artist. This is a classic way to see how do we make sure we're using only the parameters that we need. With this, we are done with module 1 for this test. Okay, so we are on the first question of module 2 on test 302. We have a word and context question here. The second module's word and context is a little bit more difficult than the first module. If you're missing this question too, I'm assuming that you might be doing a classic distractor on these, which is seeing a word you know, but thinking that this word that you know is too simple and choosing something that's a little bit more sophisticated sounding without knowing exactly what it might mean. Okay, so basically, we see intensification of weather fronts and storm systems. That synonym aligns with enhance really clearly. These other words just simply don't mean anything that could that could align with that synonym that we already have. Okay. Indemnify means to like basically like kind of like a recompensate somebody who has a problem. So you could like if a wolf eats your cow, maybe you get paid for the price of your cow. Placate means to sort of like make somebody calm with who might be angry. Customer service people might placate angry customers by offering a coupon. And then debilitate is to make something incapable of working. So all of these other ones don't work. They don't have any sort of relationship to this word intensification. So when we're working through these word and context, always look for that synonym and see which, if there is one, if we are looking for a synonym or an antonym or what have you, see which word aligns with that. We're on question 2 of module 2 of test 302. Lots of 2s here. Looking at a word and context question. As always, we're looking for a synonym, all right? We're looking for something that demonstrates to us what we're actually looking for here. So in this case, the synonym that we find, we're actually looking for an antonym, okay? So high viscosity is more resistant, while low viscosity, the opposite, should be the opposite, all right? So we're looking for something that differs from resistant. So reluctance is a great distractor. If you chose reluctance, you're aligning reluctance with resistance, but we're looking for the opposite of reluctance, okay? Omniscience has to do with being able to see beyond what you're supposed to see, like all seeing. That doesn't really work. And bravado, the connotation of bravado has to do with like typically personality. You can do things with bravado, which signifies sort of confidence, and ease and confidence are a bit related. But ease is the only one that colloquially works whatsoever in this question too. So if you're getting this one wrong, I'm assuming you're choosing something like A, and you're just seeing a synonym without reading the context of the passage and thinking, I'm looking for something that means resistant. Or you're worried that ease is too easy of a word and you want to choose something smarter sounding without really thinking about what that word means. Question 3 here on 302 module 2, our final word and context question of the test. We're looking for something that basically fits here, all right? We're also looking to get rid of things. This is one of those classic ones where being deductive, using the process of elimination, probably the first test-taking strategy we've ever learned in our lives, is going to be really important here. And is yielding in being the first, that couldn't possibly work. Absconded. To abscond with something is basically to steal something. They stealed with being the first significant collaboration. And then unremarkable is an exact opposite distractor. Notable is the only thing here that doesn't not work. All right. Everything else, when you put it in there, it doesn't fit the context, it doesn't fit the tone, it doesn't fit the meaning. There's really nothing that could work other than notable. Now, there's nothing which really signifies that it should be notable either, except that notable doesn't work. So make sure you're using the process of elimination, make sure you're being deductive, and that's how you'll arrive to your answer choice. So question 4, we have a main purpose question. All right, this is asking us to understand the purpose of this passage. It's not too different from a main idea question, but with poems, it can be a little bit difficult to figure it out, but we just really want to read into tone here. All right, tone in literature is an important way to get this. So thoughtless, we've read this already and we know what the correct answer is. So I just want to show some qualifiers which are in the distractors or the wrong answer choices that we want to be careful about, okay? So there's definitely an idea of trees suffering here. That's a good, right? That's something that's good in C. But then this word, refute, a bit of a vocab word. It means to like oppose or provide evidence to the contrary. That's the part that's wrong here. This word refute makes C wrong, even though the idea of the suffering of trees is pretty good. All right. Caring for the elderly is too far of an inference. Perhaps we could assume that talking about trees, talking about the earth, healing, we could maybe suggest there's some sort of metaphor for the elderly there. But there's nothing that's clearly demonstrates the elderly in this. And therefore, we have to get rid of it. That's the qualifier that doesn't work. And finally, we have birch leaves. We have the idea of healing. So these are what we would call recycled language distractors. But to question that, to say, is there really healing in that? That doesn't make sense, right? What do we really see? That ripping off a birch leaf, like the thoughtless hand, so human, ripping off a birch leaf is violent, right? And painful. It causes an ultimate pain, and these things try to survive. So our answer is D. Similar to the previous question 4, we have question 5 asking about the main purpose of a text. But in this case, we have literature in the form of a novel rather than in the form of poetry. It's a little bit clearer to find the main purpose here. Okay. So what we see is that despite not really knowing the language, she feels all the activity of what's going on, perceiving it while she's recuperating from an injury. All right. So let's look at some distractors here. A gives us something wrong, right? Leela does speak English, right? So not speaking English is a distractor for Leela. We can get rid of that because there's something untrue. Remember, if anything in an answer choice is wrong, we have to get rid of it. Menacing atmosphere is too far of an inference, right? We are seeing an oddly soothing atmosphere. By what means could we choose menacing to mean soothing? If we don't know what menacing or soothing means, we really need to work on our vocabulary. And then D, while this might possibly be true, right? Leela's translation, she is the only person who could translate for her. To assert, that isn't the main idea here, because where does it talk about using Leela as a translator? It doesn't even mention that Leela is a translator, actually, but rather that maybe you could infer that she could be a translator, but it isn't clarified that that is her role. The only thing that's actually in the text here is that Haruko is reacting to a continuous flow of goings and comings, like a picture book that was soothing, right? There's a lot of activity around her. It's vigorous, broad smiles. You know, all of this is activity that is an energy that she finds soothing. Okay, so that's the only one that's in the text. Remember, it might not be the most compelling answer in terms of like exciting, whereas like D or B is a little bit more woo. But it's the only one that is supported by the text and therefore the only one we can go with. Okay, we have another text structure and purpose question. The overall structure of this text, okay? So let's just read how it's structured. First, we're introduced to Patti Smith, who is a musical artist, but she's also known for autobiographical prose, okay, writing, in which she won the National Book Award describing a relationship with someone, Robert Mapplethorpe. Okay, so first starts off saying she is a songwriter and a writer of prose. Then it introduces Mapplethorpe and says Mapplethorpe was not only personal relationship, but a professional relationship as the cover artist for many of her albums. Okay. So this is an important deal here. Let's see what's wrong in the ones that aren't right. Okay. While B, the first part could possibly be proven, though I would maybe disagree. Does it talk about her work affecting other artists? No. Okay, not Patti Smith's work affecting other artists. Did we see the artistic differences that led to the relationship's breakdown? No. Okay, we don't see that in this text. And then do we get a contrast between the album with her prose? No, they're both mentioned, but they're not contrasted, okay? So really be on the lookout for those singular words and answer choices, those things that qualify them in a way which makes them wrong. Nothing wrong with A. Say what she generally was, a good songwriter, winner of a National Book Award, and then she had a particular relationship that affected her in more than one fashion, okay? If you're missing what the word fashion means in this case, it means manner, right? Or like way, in more than one way, okay? So fashion doesn't only just mean, Givenchy. So our next question here, question 7 on our reading and writing module 2 for test 302 is a cross-text analysis question. There's usually only 1 or 2 of these on every SAT. These questions seem more complicated than they actually are. It seems like they're asking us to assume or figure out, get into the mind of the person writing one or other texts and see how they might respond to what the other person wrote. But in these instances, it's usually really clear and it's based on the text. Don't change your strategy ever of going from the text. So simply going from the text here, we know that Spivey responds already to these paradoxes from the Socratic, or from Zeno of Elea, okay? So how did he respond? He said that each of these are in works of fiction, right? And that they provide unique perspectives found in the paradoxes. So we're wanting to say something along the lines of like they're interesting or important to literature, okay? Quantum physics and calculus. Is that mentioned here whatsoever? Just because he is a mathematician does not mean that quantum physics and calculus are brought up. All right. That is a too far inference. It's an unsafe inference. Historical, a fascinating time period. Well, they give a glimpse into something. They give a glimpse into something fascinating, but is it a time period? No. Puzzling, because no one has been able to solve some of the paradoxes. Do they say that these paradoxes are unsolved anywhere? No. There's nothing that proves that. Are they perhaps puzzling? Sure, but they're not proven to be unproven. Finally, foundational, because they inspired the literature he's analyzing. That is a safe inference, right? That's basically saying that he thinks that these paradoxes are important because they are seen in the literature that he analyzes. Don't go too deep on these cross-text analyses. Keep it simple. Really look at how the texts already respond to one another, and you will likely find the answer to your question. So question 8 is what we call a central details question, okay? Central ideas and details question. Whenever we see this phrase, according to the text, we are looking to the text. It will be directly said there. So why are ecologists concerned about the Nootka lupin flower? Well, because it is invasive due to its detrimental impact on native flora, particularly crowberry and blueberry patches. All right, so this particular flower is concerning to ecologists because of its capacity for that. So this is the safest inference from that, okay? It has a detrimental impact on crowberry and blueberries. Crowberries and blueberries are negatively affected. Direct link. It said verbatim in the passage, just in a little bit of a different form. Okay. So what we want to avoid in this are recycled language distractors, right? Crowberry and blueberry are mentioned in A, right? The flower has vibrant coloring as mentioned in B. Blueberry and crowberry and invasive and Nootka lupin are all mentioned in the passage, but just they are not mentioned in the right way. Okay, just because it's mentioned doesn't mean that the answer choice is compelling. We need to see how it's mentioned, how it's utilized, and that's how we can arrive to C as our answer for question 8. So question 9 here on module 2 is another detail question. Actually, I want to use my blue pen for that. It's another detail question, meaning what we're looking for is going to be referred to nearly verbatim in the text, right? So we are looking to find a reason why the Tiktaalik anatomical features are interesting, right? Why is this extinct fish interesting? Because it was discovered a while ago and it's supposedly important. Right here, they provided valuable insights into evolutionary adaptations necessary for the transition from fish to terrestrial life. All right. And it was an intermediate state between fish and tetrapods, which we can assume are animals that live on land. I mean, we see, this possibly. So is the species I'm not going to continue to pronounce, is it a tetrapod? No, it's a fish. All right. So this doesn't really work. Also, 475 million instead of 375 million. Just a little thing like that is enough to make it wrong. The fossil established a timeline of adaptations for the Canadian Arctic. Okay, so it was found in the Canadian Arctic, but is that the same conditions that were experienced 375 million years ago? No, not whatsoever. C, oh, this is like a sophisticated, this sounds really interesting, but is this referred to in the passage? No, not whatsoever. Whereas D is directly in what we've already identified with the blue pen as interesting, right? They support the idea that tetrapods evolved from fish that began to venture on the land. It was the intermediate stage between fish and tetrapods and the transition to terrestrial life. That's why they already said it's important. So whenever we see according to the text, we want to make sure we're going directly to the text and we are using the text to produce our answer. All right, so we have a command of evidence question. We want to illustrate the claim. Okay, so what is the claim? The claim is that traditional rhetoric plays a role in Poe's work, a big role. Okay, so all this other stuff is relatively unessential, right? Psychoanalytic stuff we don't really need. We don't really need to know about Lacan. Okay, and we also want to be focused on Diane Hoovler, nobody else. Okay, which shows us a few things that are wrong, right? So which of these answer choices mention rhetorical techniques? We kind of have to know rhetorical techniques, what they are, okay? So we have repetitive actions. So formalistic literary devices, rhetorical techniques. We know that those are synonyms, okay? Repetitive actions, interconnected subjects, and symbolism. All right, that brings up rhetorical techniques. That's why we know C is correct. Does D mention rhetorical connections? No. Does B mention rhetorical techniques? No. Does A mention rhetorical techniques? No, right? We see some issues. A lot of these are sophisticated. They're baggage. They're making interesting claims. They'd be interesting things to read. But what we are looking for is only support for the specific claim about rhetorical techniques. Only one answer choice, C, has anything to do with rhetorical techniques. Okay, we have a command of evidence based on a quantitative figure question here for 11 on module 2. We want to support Smith and Ma's suggestion. Okay, so that we really need to see. That's the first thing that we need to clarify, right? So what was their suggestion? That if estimates of economic impact vary based on the methodology chosen to generate those results. All right, so any answer choice that has nothing to do with this claim is going to be wrong. All right. So we want to see that they vary based on the methodology. We want to make sure it's right. So some ways we could be wrong. Ooh, this looks really good. An input-output method produced the highest predicted economic impact, while the cost-benefit method produced the lowest predicted economic impact. That directly supports our claim. How on earth is it wrong? Oshuala, input-output. Oshuala, general equilibrium. Okay, so we want to make sure our answer choice is actually aligned with the figure. Something as small as that is enough to make an answer choice wrong. B does kind of the same thing as A, but a little bit more robustly without anything incorrect, right? Siegel and Clary and Dietz were similar to one another because they used similar methods, right? They both used input-output and both came up with about 50, 60 million. Whereas these other people did different mechanisms or different methods, right? The cost benefit and the general equilibrium, and came out with very different economic impacts. So everything is right in B that we could use. C, we see there's no comparison. That's just a fact. It's true. Sure, it's true. But does that support the suggestion that there would be that the methodology changes estimates? No. And then finally, D suggests that the methodology wouldn't vary what your economic impact would be, right? So D is kind of an opposite distractor. It's kind of erodes Smith and Moss suggestion. So the only one with anything going for it in the right direction is B. Really watch out for those little things like an A. I'm sure a lot of people watching this video chose A because they just didn't see that Oshuala wasn't input-output, but was rather general equilibrium. So for question 12 here on module 2, we have another command of evidence quantitative question. You've already done this question, so I'm just going to skip to the important part. I'm not going to read the whole thing. We want to describe data from the table that supports the researcher's hypothesis. So we need to see the researcher's hypothesis, right? What is it? It's right here. That because Jakarta experiences a tropical monsoonal climate, it'd likely experience more rainy days and fewer dry days than Port Moresby, which has a tropical savanna climate. All right. Now, this hypothesis comes from all of this information up here, but this is the hypothesis we're focused on, and we have to compare to the table. So we do see that there are more rainy days and fewer dry days, perhaps in Jakarta than Port Moresby. Perhaps, yeah. So let's see which supports that. All right. There's a longer wet season in Jakarta than Port Moresby, right? True. The wet season in Jakarta is 6 months, and the wet season in Moresby is 3 months, and then the dry season is equal to the wet season in Jakarta, whereas the dry season in Port Moresby is 9 months. All right. So do they both experience similar rainfall in the rainy seasons? Yes, they do, but the rainy seasons are different in length. Is A true? It's a true fact, right? There's nothing untrue about that fact, nor is there anything untrue. Well, nor is there anything untrue in D. But does D compare between Jakarta and Port Moresby? No. Does A compare the right things between Jakarta and Port Moresby? No, it compares the wrong things. Does B compare the right things between Jakarta and Port Moresby? No. Only C compares what we're actually relevant about, which is that the wet is wetter in Jakarta, as we see, and the dry is drier in Port Moresby, which we see. Okay, so got to find the hypothesis and support it by the table. So question 13 here, we have what we call an inference question, a logical completion question. We want to make sure that we understand where the passage is going. Usually a word like therefore really signifies what we're going for. So the therefore comes from the previous sentence. What does the previous sentence show? That there were shortcomings in the rabbit-proof fence because they impacted indigenous communities in a negative way. All right. So there are some answer choices which kind of get close, but just not in the right way. So A, I like this idea of the symbol of impact on indigenous settlements. That's kind of what we want, right? But on the spread of rabbits across Australia, this has nothing to do with the spread of rabbits across Australia, right? The fences impacting indigenous settlements and the spread of rabbits across Australia are two things related to the fence, but they're not exactly related to one another, according to this passage. We're looking for something which just says it impacts indigenous ways of life, the life ways, the life path of indigenous people in Australia, which is what B does, right? It says that it was an imposed barrier on the natural flow of indigenous life. This was a imposed barrier, an imposed fence impacting the movement across ancestral lands. Those two things mean the same thing, just put in different ways. You got to pick up on that. C, well, while it was well-intentioned, but maybe ineffective, or maybe bad, right? It was well-intentioned, but maybe had bad outcomes. The rabbit population part is not what's clarified here, nor is that where this is going. This place is going from, it was for rabbits, but rather has an impact on indigenous communities. C doesn't consider the indigenous communities. And D is pretty irrelevant, right? So, I mean, we could perhaps be choosing that answer choice if we're thinking, you're just jumping to too many conclusions there. You're making a really disastrous jump to an unfounded, unsupported, unsafe inference, which we really want to avoid on inference questions. So we always want to pick conservative inferences, which is how we arrive to B. So the last question on the reading and writing, or on the reading portion, excuse me, of module 2 is question 14. We have another logical inference question here, like we do on 13. We need to be considering what is safe to infer from what we have going on here. All right, so in the text, you've already read this, so I'm going to just highlight what I think is really important for this. Manganese and iron utilize common absorption, and the bioavailability of manganese can be influenced by iron. Okay, so looks like manganese and iron maybe conflict, or maybe they go together. There's some sort of relationship between manganese and iron. So subjects in a long study received either placebo, just iron, just manganese, or a combination of manganese and iron. When receiving both of them, when receiving just manganese, we see increases in white blood cell count compared to baseline. With iron supplementation, we see lower manganese nutritional status. So we would then need to see something along the lines of either less manganese, lower blood cell count, or lower white blood cell whatever this is, right? This is manganese activity, something showing that manganese is less active, less available, something that decreases manganese nutrition. All right. What does that? A, it continues the logic of iron impacts manganese in a negative way, right? By lowering it. So B, if you didn't read this last sentence, if you just read the first ones, right? B would be possible. You might think, but not what we're looking for. This is too extreme, right? All members, that's not what you need to see that. And then finally, D would be true if, again, we were just looking at the top and we didn't see the value claim right here. But that's where all the importance is in that very next set, that very first preceding sentence to the logical completion. Okay, so when you're on these logical completion texts, make sure you're looking directly before the place that you're completing, and you'll more likely find the answer. And with that, we finish the reading and move on to the writing portion. 15 on this test. We're looking at a question asking about tense. So this is the topic that we're looking at. Hunter Waterhouse. I don't really know how to pronounce that. But notice this here. We see designed. And then we see is, knowing that it's singular. completed in the past. This is what it looks like. We're going to go with characterized here because that is the proper past tense. Will characterized is marked off in red because it won't work because that means it would be in the future. Had been characterized means that it's something that doesn't exist anymore. It had existed at one point, but no longer existed. I had been a student at UC Berkeley, no longer. And are characterizing, we have are, which is the wrong tense or the wrong number there when you're looking for something along the lines of is. So there's something wrong with A, C, and D. All the parts that are wrong in those are underlined in red. And there's nothing wrong with B, characterized. So that is why we go with it. So question 16 on module 2 is another verb tense question. This one is a pretty easy question. So if we're missing this, we might just be rushing here far too much. So we see that this Berlin Museum is known, so that's present tense. But when talking about Nefertiti in the Amarna period, we know we are no longer in the present tense, but talking about an art, someone from an artifact. Okay, so has been maybe is the most compelling distractor if we think that we're conjugating to the Berlin Museum, but we're not. We're conjugating to Nefertiti. Were would be plural, but we only have one bust, right? I'm not talking about artifacts. So you might be choosing C because of artifacts, but make sure you clarify what noun we're conjugating. And then B would put us in the future, will be, but this, of course, is in the past. Therefore, we have A. All right, so this is question 17 on module 2. We have a lot of what classic things that make an SAT punctuation question ultimately kind of difficult. For one, all of this sentence is honestly useless for the passage. Still want us reading it in case it could be. Oftentimes it is, but in this case, it's just distracting, putting stuff in our head. Now, what we're really being asked is to see, is this second bit a clause, an elaboration, or something else? All right. So with an elaboration, which would be the form of A, which you might be choosing if you got this wrong, it must be clarifying something immediately preceding it in the preceding clause. So this first clause, this climate subtype is characterized by monthly mean temperatures consistently exceeding 64 degrees throughout the year. This isn't elaborating on one of these things. It isn't elaborating on what the year might be, or it doesn't elaborate on what these mean temperatures mean. Okay, so it is not sufficient to be an elaboration. Okay. Now, B would mean that this first part is an independent clause and this second part is an independent clause. So this first part is surely an independent clause. This climate subtype is characterized by monthly mean temperatures exceeding this temperature throughout the year. Clearly an independent clause. But our second part, along with the presence of a distinct dry season, that along is subordinating. So we can't go with B because the second clause is not independent. So we can go with C because that along is subordinating, so it can be a dependent clause, which we would connect with just a comma. And then D, we use a comma, so that's all good, but it's in the wrong spot. With the presence of a distinct dry season throughout the year along, right? It's just in the wrong spot. They're separated improperly. So therefore, we have to resolve to C. All right, so here on 18, we have a kind of punctuation question again. So we see that we are within a non-essential phrase, which might compel you to choose a comma because, We use commas in non-essential phrases. But remember, if we're starting with a dash and ending with a dash, we have a dash. We're using a non-essential phrase with dashes. So there's no need to add a comma to a non-essential phrase if it's already being created with dashes. So we're really just looking at that non-essential phrase. A lawn sport wherein players use a mallet to strike balls through the hoops. Okay, there's no need for any punctuation here, ultimately. What are our roles, right? The roles for commas are lists or non-essential phrases. Role for semicolon is separating independent clauses. Nothing like that is happening here, so there's no need for any punctuation. Even if you hear the slightest of a pause, remember that every time you hear a pause, it doesn't necessitate a comma. Hearing pauses doesn't necessitate a comma. Using a comma necessitates a pause, but it doesn't work in the inverse way. Sometimes we just kind of throw them in, pauses in, just based on how we read. More importantly, though, there's no role for a comma here, so we have no need to use one. So for 19, we have a punctuation question all about lists. All right. So there are certain occasions when we will use a semicolon in lists. That occasion is if items in the list have a comma within the item. So if the item needs a comma in it, then you would use semicolons to separate each item from what itself, from each item from the others. Okay. But none of these items in this list have any commas. They just are long items in a list. So they include, they supplement, and so the items in the list are, they form, they include, they supplement, and they added. All right. That's just commas that we're going to use to combine them. But B is wrong because for the final element in any list, we need to have a comma and an and, right? Which is why C does work. If you miss this question, it's likely that you didn't realize we're having a list, we're using these past tense verbs because there's a bunch of information between each of those verbs. Always try to narrow your focus to only what's most essential. The team formed, included, supplemented, and finally added. We would put a comma there every time if it was that short, right? But because there's all this other information, it kind of gets in the way. So focus on what's essential when it comes to lists. So question 20 is something of a combo punctuation question. So we have two things at play. We have a non-essential phrase, which is created by parentheses. And then we also have to figure out, are we separating two independent clauses or some other type of clauses, okay? So we only have two options that separate independent clauses, and then our other options are keeping them with a comma or just a conjunction, okay? So let's see how these are in fact both independent clauses. The presence of blah, 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 blah indicates blah, blah, blah. That is an own independent clause. We have our subject, we have our predicate, and it doesn't have a subordinating thing like a while. And then our first sentence, Turkey's Kadıköy province predates. We have our subject, we have our predicate, and we have no subordination. Therefore, we have two independent clauses. Because of that, we can get rid of C and D. Why? Well, D is just the and, meaning we're not connecting two independent clauses. We would always need a comma with the fanboys. So we would need the comma as well. And C doesn't have the fanboys. It's just a comma. So C is a comma splice and D is a run-on. So A and B are both good on the basis of their period. But now, we need to know this certain English convention that when we put a range of dates describing a period, we put them within a pair of parentheses because we don't need it there, right? We could just say dating back to the Chalcolithic period. Okay. The second period being the period after, like the punctuation mark after the word period. As such, 5500 to 3500 BCE is unnecessary. Okay. That means we can put it within a pair of parentheses. This is the most common way you might see parentheses on the test in this sort of non-essential phrase. clarifying something that comes before. That's why A is correct. All right, 21 is a really pretty easy question. If you're missing this, you are reading way too fast. All right. Tiny describes the foreleg. Tiny is the adjective that modifies foreleg. Okay. We would never put a comma between an adjective and the noun it modifies unless there's another adjective there. So we might say the big, comma, red car. But we never put a comma between red and car. We might put a comma between two different adjectives modifying the same noun if those adjectives don't modify one another. Right? So big, comma, red car. That makes sense. We would never say the red, comma, car. So we would never say tiny, comma, forelegs. So B and D both don't work because we can't put a comma between an adjective and a noun. And then why would there be a comma before tiny? What role does that serve? Characterized by tiny for, right? That there's no need for punctuation there because there's no role that we've learned from our punctuation rules that is fulfilled there. So the only option that makes any sense is C. If you're not getting that, you're moving way too quickly. This is probably one of the easier questions I've seen on the tests. Okay, you need to slow down and ask yourself, what's really happening here, right? What's this list really between? It is characterized by this, this, and this. We don't need a comma to introduce a list. We don't need any punctuation to introduce a list unless we have a specific situation in which the thing that's introducing the list is an independent clause. In that case, then we use a colon. 22 is another fairly easy question here on module 2. Basically, we have a phrase. Simply put is a phrase. We cannot separate simply put out from itself if it's being used in that phrase. Now, simply and put won't always appear next to each other as a phrase. So you could, for example, imagine a sentence that says something along the lines of, it's very easy to hang a painting. Simply put your nail on the thing and hammer. Okay. In that case, simply put is not a phrase. But when we say simply put, we usually mean it in the phrase to basically say, like to introduce something that's going to be said in a simple, easily digestible way. So simply put can't be separated. B and C are wrong. But simply put is functioning as a transitional adverb. And not every transition that appears at the beginning of a sentence needs a comma, but in this case it does, because it's kind of subordinating. So we're going to go with A for 22. Simply put, the next occurrence is determined solely by the current state. 23 here on module 2 is another transitions question, but we need to make sure that we're seeing that not every time do we have a transition do we need a comma. It is not always an introduction to a clause, okay? In this case, while functions as a subordinating element. So our transition functions as a subordinating element. Why do we know? Because we have this construction here where we start with a dependent clause and then we add an independent clause to it. See that comma? So therefore, it's going to be just subordinating. So thus and nevertheless don't work because of their commas, and also they don't work because of their meaning. Thus means like therefore, nevertheless means like however. While has similar meaning to nevertheless, but is in the right function, and indeed is the right function as while. It's the same. However, it has a wrong meaning. Indeed is used to build on top of something, but indeed doesn't naturally result from the Japanese codex idea. We wouldn't say a Japanese codex is indeed from China. All right, so therefore we have while. Okay, as you might see, this is a little bit of a different place than where we've been looking at the previous questions. For some reason on my PDF, question looks different from the question that you saw on most likely test press. So I copied and pasted this into my whiteboard here. You're a little confused by that. That's why. So let's look at this question, which is ultimately just a transitions question. Noting a lag in boot time, these researchers implemented various optimization. By utilizing methods, they were able to achieve this kind of optimization, okay? By is the only one that works here. The way we can tell is because all of these other transitions have different meanings. Therefore, doesn't work on the consequence of meaning a thus. It proves what comes before. There's no proving here. This is just an example. Indeed, doesn't work because there's no comma. Instead, also doesn't have a comma. By is the only one which functions in this form without the comma, where it's actually a subordinating term or subordinating word that turns this first clause into a dependent clause for this complex sentence. That is why by is what works for question 24. So 25 on module 2 is one of our trickier transitions questions that we'll ever see. As for why is because we're looking, it's ultimately the end of the sentence which clarifies the meaning of our transition, okay? So the Greek artist Phidias is known for his structural masterpieces such as Zeus and Olympia. He oversaw the construction of the Parthenon from this period to this period, okay? From that, we can't really know what this means because we can't know for sure if a construction of the Parthenon might have had some sort of specific relevance to sculpture. But then this last part, redirecting his focus from sculpture to our architectural pursuits, shows, we have a pivot here, and we need a pivoting transition. We need to convey the meaning of a pivot. And the only option which would do that is nevertheless. Nonetheless, perhaps, however, yet, those things would work as well. Thus proves or builds it. This would suggest that this sentence proves the sentence before. And we might have thought that if we didn't see that we have structure or sculpture to architecture. Moreover, is building on it. It's suggesting another thing that is being done that builds on what comes before, but can be a little bit unrelated. We don't have that here. And then specifically would be evidence or an example that proves or exemplifies what comes before, kind of emphasizing it, which we don't see either. We have a pivot because of this second clause in our second sentence. So make sure you're reading the whole thing. If you're not reading the whole thing, you're probably not going to get A, and that's probably why you're watching this video. Question 26 on module 2 is the first of our final 2 rhetorical synthesis questions. Unlike every other question on the SAT, I'd like for us to go to the question first when we are looking at these rhetorical synthesis questions. So first thing we want to do is look at the question to find what parameters are actually important, because the rest of these parameters would likely be superfluous. So we need to describe the problem, and we need to present at least one solution to an audience unfamiliar with biology. So what does that mean? Our answer choice must have a solution, it must mention the problem, and it must take a sort of assumption that the audience isn't going to know a bunch of jargon without it being defined, okay? So here's a definition of the BBB. That's something that we're going to need. We need at least one solution. These are our 2 solutions, so at least one of these needs to show up in our answer choice. And then the problem we need to find is that the delivery is difficult, okay? So delivery for most therapeutics is difficult. That is why D is correct. We see that we have the problem. It's difficult to deliver the therapeutic solutions. We are assuming an audience is unfamiliar with biology because we define a blood-brain barrier. And finally, we give at least one example of a solution, which is using or exploring special peptides to try to break this barrier. C is wrong because one, we don't have the blood-brain barrier described, and additionally, we don't get that much of an explanation of a solution. A is wrong because we really only have a solution. We don't have a problem too much. The problem isn't described. And B, we have the problem described. All right, here's the problem. And we have the blood-brain barrier defined, but what's missing? The solution. So A, B, and C are all wrong because they're missing at least one element, and D has all three. That's why we look at the question first on rhetorical synthesis. Question 27 is our final question for Module 2 of the Reading and Writing 302, the final question of this whole reading and writing test as a whole. This is a rhetorical synthesis question, meaning, sorry, I want to use blue there, meaning we must, unlike every other question on the SAT, look at the question stem first before reading the text. Why? These rhetorical synthesis questions have a lot of superfluous or extra unnecessary information, and the question specifies to us what we are actually looking for. So what are we looking for? We want to emphasize the dangers of non-native predators to animals that are native to Christmas Island. So we want to see native Christmas Island animals being threatened by non-native predators. Okay, so non-native species we see are cats, dogs, and rats. Okay, these are probably something that might come up, or just we might just see non-native predators is the topic. Okay, now fauna are harmed. Okay, so we want to emphasize that fauna are harmed. We see this next one, that land and seabirds are the ones adversely affected. So these two notes are probably the two notes that we definitely need to see in our answer choice. Some of this other stuff is probably superfluous. So the reason we like B, which is the correct answer, is that we have diverse fauna and we have the non-native animals posing a threat, and we give an example of what that fauna is. This is everything we need to see. A only describes Christmas Island and the presence of predators. Okay, A is a good option of summarizing these notes. But that's not what our question asks. Our question asks for us to emphasize only one particular thing. C does another good summary of what's there. It definitely summarizes what's interesting about Christmas Island, but it doesn't answer the question. It doesn't have our particular parameters. And then finally, D is just wrong. Okay, so there's nothing about D that we should be compelled by. Even though we do see recycled language distractor, the meaning of D should be enough to get us getting rid of it easily. So therefore, B is the only one which has the parameters we need on a rhetorical synthesis question, and that is why we can go with that. And with that, we end the reading and writing module 2.